Adam in the garden taking a chance.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
And the impact of the budget battle.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Black Nouveau. I'm Milton, Dockery.
And I'm Faithe Colas. We're glad you could join us. This week, we're going to look at a number of legislative issues, including the budget and the voter ID bill.
We'll also preview Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, currently at the Milwaukee Rep, and get former State Representative Polly Williams' take on recent activities in our state capitol.
But first, we're going to continue last week's discussion with Marc Levine, the founding director of UWM Center for Economic Development. Milton has that interview.
Last week, we discussed the budget repair bill. This week, we want to look at the impact that effort and the governor's budget may have on Milwaukee. Dr. Levine, welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Milton.
Dr. Levine, shouldn't public employees feel the same pinch as everyone else, though, sir?
Well, I think there needs to be some shared sacrifice, and public employees, as we know, in the last budget cycle have taken pay cuts. They've been on furlough. I should say, full disclosure, I've been on furlough. I'm a public employee. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. But we've taken, essentially the equivalent of a little over 3% pay cuts in the last couple of years. We had a pay increase that was deferred. In terms of pension cuts, I think that's something that's completely, quite frankly, irresponsible for the governor to be suggesting, in the sense that it's a violation of contract. Individuals were hired under a set of criteria, under a set of guidelines that they expected to organize their working careers around, and now, without any negotiation, and indeed the governor wants to eliminate the ability to even negotiate about these benefits, the governor wants to change kind of the rules of the game after they started, which is quite amazing for a governor who professes a great deal of support for capitalism and rules of contract, but suddenly contracts for individuals and for individual workers don't really matter, because he's created this false crisis in the state and claimed that essentially we're broke, which is sort of the equivalent of saying you're broke if you don't have any money in your checking account, you don't want to take it out of your savings account. We have other ways of raising money than simply getting it from public employees and from sticking it to public employees. So the notion of shared sacrifice is fine. We do need to get through this budget deficit situation, but the notion of essentially putting it all on the backs of essentially public sector workers and important public services in the state, while leaving the wealthy and corporations completely untouched, and not only untouched, but getting another set of benefits from the governor. There are all sorts of corporate tax breaks in this bill. There are all sorts of breaks where the wealthy can shield even more of their income in things like health savings accounts. So this is, as Warren Buffett put it, this is class warfare being waged against working people.
Yeah. How would the African American community be affected by this, sir?
Well, I think, like everybody, there's going to be pain in the African American community, and to the extent that, because there's a disproportionate amount of unemployment and a disproportionate amount of poverty in the black community, I think the impact of the cuts in government programs are going to be even greater. The cuts, for example, I think in public schooling, where aid is going to be cut so that per pupil, the amount of money available per pupil, for example, MPS, right, almost $1 billion, 900 million, I think, is going to have profound, how can it not have a profound impact in terms of increasing class size, in terms of cutting important early childhood programs, in terms of programs of college preparation, or a whole series of programs on which we rely. STEM, I think, is at risk. I mean, you can go down the list of the educational cuts that are at risk, and this doesn't even then get us to what's going to happen to services in the city when city government has to deal with the cuts in local aid. I mean, to what extent is public safety going to be affected by the cuts that mayors are going to have to absorb?
So not to mean to cut you off, sir, but what I hear you saying is this is going to impact Milwaukee in a variety of ways. Public safety issues. What else?
Well, it's going to impact education. It's going to impact a lack of investment in our infrastructure to modernize for the future. It's probably going to impact our ability to effectively deliver a whole range of public services. It's going to impact social services. It's going to affect us across the board. It's going to radically transform our state and our city.
Dr. Levine, who benefits the most from the budget that was released last week?
Well, I think I've already made it pretty clear. I think that the two key beneficiaries, because I think the entire budget is organized around their class interests, are the extremely wealthy, those at really the top of the economic ladder, and Wisconsin's corporations.
Well, talk about this for me. There were, what, $117 million of tax cuts that were pushed through. How are those tax cuts going to be paid for, sir, for corporations?
Well, they're not paid for. The governor hasn't paid for them. They're added with the supposition that they're going to create jobs and help reinvigorate the economy and speed the recovery. In fact, quite the opposite is going to occur because of the governor's budget, taking all of that purchasing power out of the hands of public employees who would be purchasing the products of corporations and businesses, which would boost the economy, is going to, in most economic models would suggest this, dramatically reduce economic productivity in the state and ultimately reduce employment in the state. And so we've essentially got a budget situation that is not going to, in fact, revitalize the economy. And let me just make one final point on that. We actually have a bit of a case study on this. If the idea is that cutting taxes on the wealthy and cutting taxes on corporations is going to speed economic growth, Wisconsin should already be booming. We have cut corporate taxes in half in the last 20 years. Okay. We have cut taxes on the wealthy from 11.75% down to 6.75%, and now we raised it slightly. But we've cut all those dramatically, but yet apparently that's not enough to get the economy really booming.
I have 1 more minute left, and I have 2 more questions, 30 seconds each. Quick. Is Governor Scott Walker literally reshaping government away from the traditional model?
Yeah, I believe he is. I believe he is way out of the mainstream of Wisconsin politicians. He's way out of the mainstream of the Wisconsin progressive tradition. I think he's far to the right, for example, even of Tommy Thompson, who I think tried to do some things that were also out of the tradition. So yes, I would say this is way out of the mainstream, and I think we need to come back to a more negotiated center of Wisconsin politics.
Finally, in 30 seconds, Dockery did win the election. Doesn't he have the right to fulfill his campaign promises?
He did win the election, and elections do have consequences, to use now a cliche, and people need to definitely remember that. But he did not win the election with a mandate to do all of the incredibly radical things that he's doing. And even if he won the election, the loyal opposition has a responsibility to make the points that those policies are not going to be in the best interest of Wisconsinites. So no one challenges his right to propose anything he wants. The question is whether it's good for Wisconsin and whether legislators will deliberate and honestly negotiate these issues rather than follow lockstep what the governor is suggesting.
Dr. Levine, thank you so much for joining us, sir, as usual.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
While much attention has been focused on the controversy over the governor's budget repair bill, another bill has been working its way through the legislature. It's the voter photo ID bill, and it will have an impact on every voter in Wisconsin when we go to the polls. Joanne Williams takes a look at how the rules for voting are going to change.
For as long as we can remember, our word and our address was all we needed to vote in Wisconsin. State Representative Jeff Stone and other Republicans in the state legislature have introduced this bill in the Assembly and this bill in the state Senate that would require we show another form of identification, an official ID with a picture.
And on 3, 1, 2, 3.
Before we are given a ballot to vote. In explaining his reasoning, Representative Stone told me that the photo ID will be required. He said, to make the system work more efficiently and have people have confidence that everybody that's voting is somebody that's eligible. Neil Albrecht, the Assistant Director for the City of Milwaukee Election Commission, said voters already have confidence in the current system that asks only for our proof of address if necessary.
Well, first of all, if you're already registered, there's no ID requirement, and a lot of people are used to that, just being able to provide their name and their address and turn out at the polls. Now, the current Senate Bill 6 is very restrictive. It's a DMV-issued photo ID. So you would need that to be able to vote if you're already registered, or you would need that if you are doing an election day registration.
Representative Stone believes we need more proof to vote. He said, we've had people the last 2 years that have been prosecuted for voting more than once. We've had issues where people voted and we weren't able to identify where they lived and that type of thing.
Has there been so much fraud in our elections that we need this kind of bill?
Well, we certainly haven't seen that in the city of Milwaukee. I think unfortunately for the city, looking back on the 2004 election, we saw an election that was very poorly administered, and there were significant clerical errors, both at the voting sites and even in the reconciliation of the election that drew a tremendous amount of public attention and speculation. That doesn't equate to voter fraud. And in all of the elections since that time, every vote can be counted and can be counted for our ballots balance to our voters. But I think what's really key, again, is to go back and look at voter access and the integrity of the election. And if anything is going to be implemented that could restrict voter access, I think it should be warranted, or we would like to see that it's warranted.
Milwaukee Alderwoman Malele Coggs, a Democrat, is against requiring photo IDs to vote. She feels it will do just the opposite, deny many voters access to a ballot.
I do believe that communities of color, both Hispanic and African American, along with the elderly and students and handicapped people, will be disenfranchised if this voter ID bill becomes law.
So what kind of identification will we need to vote? Here are the rules in the current proposed and the revised Senate bill. We could show a state-issued driver's license, Wisconsin ID card, tribal identification card, military identification card, and now we could show a passport or naturalization papers. But for the hundreds of young adults who traditionally turn out at the polls, a student ID will not be acceptable. Representative Stone said, "We expanded. People that are elderly or disabled are exempted from this legislation. Anyone that doesn't have an ID because they are poor, it will be provided for them. And we are also working right now on addressing the concerns about how college students can identify themselves and participate." What will this new requirement cost the voters?
There's an expense that comes along with a driver's license. I believe it's $28 now. And with the state ID, the bill does allow for the state ID to be free. The problem with that, though, is in order to obtain a state ID, generally speaking, most people need a birth certificate. Birth certificates, at least in Milwaukee County, cost $20. The problem with that is, in the eyes of many of us, that's a poll tax. Voting is a right. It is supposed to be free. And although the ID may be free, what it takes to get the ID is not.
In order to avoid a legal liability around a poll tax, because there cannot be a cost associated with voting to voters, the bill also includes a free identification certificate that would be issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles. That in itself may take some time to implement. You're looking at a limited number of DMV stations just in the city of Milwaukee alone, and suddenly a significant percentage of the population trying to pursue these certificates to be able to vote in elections.
The new version of the bill would also not be enforced until January. Voters in elections before that would be allowed to vote without showing a photo ID, but receive written explanations of the change. And under the new bill, if voters show up without a photo ID, they will have to use what's called a provisional ballot, and that could delay the results of an election.
A provisional ballot is a ballot. It's a regular ballot, but it's held. It doesn't go into the voting machine. It's held until 4 o'clock the day after the election, and that person has until that time to provide their updated ID. So suddenly we're going to go from having immediate election results. I think in the state of Wisconsin, statewide, certainly in Milwaukee County, you have election results the night of the election, to a system where it could be 4 o'clock the next day at the very earliest when you know the actual outcome of an election.
Currently, you must live in the state for only 10 days. The new rules say you will have to live in Wisconsin for 28 days before you can cast a ballot.
The voter photo ID bill will also eliminate our ability to vouch for someone at the polls, like a roommate or a spouse who does not have the proper identification.
A 1, a 2, you know what to do. Rambling man
makes no change in me.
These are scenes from Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, a new production of August Wilson's first Broadway hit that is currently at the Milwaukee Rep.
Ma Rainey is an actual historical character. She was called the Mother of the Blues, and she was very popular during the 1920s. She was kind of a pioneer. She paved the way for Bessie Smith and those who came after her.
Bessie Smith sang in Ma's backup band. So, but it deals with Ma Rainey and the music industry of that era and how it was changing, and the recording industry was becoming a big part of it. But her thing was on the circuit, so to speak. So it just deals with that kind of exploitation of the music of that time, and she really isn't the central character. It's more about one of her musicians who is a young upstart kind of musician who wants to do his music. And so in a nutshell, it just deals with that aspect of the music industry in the blues era.
The play explores a range of issues: race, age, sex, and gender. The original Broadway production, starring Teresa Merritt and Charles S. Dutton, won numerous awards. It became the third play in Wilson's Pittsburgh cycle of 10 plays.
This one actually is the only one that doesn't take place in Pittsburgh. This one is in Chicago, but August was from Pittsburgh. And I think he didn't go into it thinking, oh, I'm gonna write 10 plays about Pittsburgh. And I think, but when he wrote, when he started writing them, I think the Hill District was a big part of his life. And so a lot of them take place in the Hill District. And if you go to Pittsburgh and you walk around the Hill District and you've seen one of his plays, you can hear the language. So I think, just knowing that someone is that close to his foundation, I think is a good thing. So I think from that aspect, again, I would say that there's no other playwright that I think could capture that much in their work, and he does that. And the Pittsburgh cycle is just, it's just a phenomenal thing that when you find, if you sat down and read each one of them, you'd get a history of life, and I think that's what makes it so important.
When August was writing, he would go to little diners and dives and just places and just listen to how people talked, and he'd write it down kind of verbatim, kind of what they said and how they said it. So it's just really regular kind of people in everyday kind of situations and their struggles and their triumphs and those types of things, and it's just they're very human kind of stories. So it isn't just black people that relate to them.
The blues help you to get out of the bed in the morning. You get up knowing you ain't alone. There's something else out there in the world. Something's been added by that song. This be an empty world without the blues. I take that emptiness and try and fill it up with something.
You fill it up with something the folks can't be without, Ma. That's why they call you the mother of the blues. You fill up that emptiness in a way like ain't nobody ever thought of doing before. Now they can't be without it.
I ain't started the blues way of singing. The blues always been here.
August was a poet before he was a playwright, and so his language is very poetic and lyrical, and so it's a challenge, and it's also a joy to work on his work because there's a lot to deal with and a lot to handle, and it's fun trying to find all those different intricacies of the characters, which each character is very, very multi-leveled, and they're very spiritual as well.
I originated the role of Aunt Esther in his second to last play, Gem of the Ocean. So I've done Gem of the Ocean, of course. I did Joe Turner's Come and Gone at Penumbra Theater in where I'm from, Minneapolis. I've done Ma before. This is my third Ma Rainey. And I've also done Piano Lesson. So I'm trying to make my way through the canon.
This one for me it's the fourth time I've directed it. I did play the lead guy back when I was young enough to do that. And I also directed it. So it's close to me because I met August at a time before the play came out, before he was a big name person. Charles Dutton was a friend of mine who played Levy on Broadway. And so during that time, to see what became of this man that I met who had just written this play, it has a special place for me because it was my first experience with him, and then I've had such a rich experience with this particular play. I've directed or acted in 18 productions of August's work. So, you know, it's this one it's the first one, so it makes me feel good to be back at it.
Even Adam in the garden taking a chance. Adam didn't take time to get his pants off. Hear me talking to you. I don't bite my tongue.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom continues at the Milwaukee Rep through March 27th. And here's the answer to the quiz question. In what city do most of August Wilson's plays take place? His home city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here are the 4 winners of the tickets to the current production of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, compliments of the Milwaukee Rep.
For 30 years, Annette Polly Williams served in the Wisconsin Legislature. She joins us now on Black Nouveau. Welcome, Polly.
Thank you for inviting me.
You are welcome. Well, let's get right to it. With all that's going on in Madison, any regrets about retiring?
Well, I sort of have mixed feelings with all of the events and things that happen in Madison right now. I like a fight, and so...
Well, this is truly one.
Yeah, right, and that's where I get all my energy from, is when there's a fight. So, but I'm also happy that I'm retired, because there's so many other things that I'm doing also. But yeah, I kind of feel for my colleagues. I kind of wish I was there to kind of help give them some guidance and direction, yes.
Guidance and direction. Anything different than what they're doing that you would advise them on?
Well, as you probably know, a lot of us that left, we were the seasoned legislators, and so we've been through events such as this. Many of our legislators right now have never experienced this type of outpouring of people coming in to take a stand for what they believe in. But I'm a product of the 50s and 60s, so we're used to that. And I've had several young people call me, not necessarily from the legislature, but they're just overwhelmed. They've never seen anything like this before. And they're just marveling at the fact that I don't seem to be all excited. I said, because been there, done that.
It is another moment in history.
Yes, it is. And most of us in my age bracket, we've been through the turmoil of the struggle that we went to get to where we are right now. And then, of course, we had to sit and see that all those things that we were fighting for, it looks like what's happening now is trying to take away all those things. And it's kind of disheartening to see this. And hopefully the community, would they continue to take a stand, that it would be continuing, that they would continue to fight the way we did back in the 50s and the 60s.
Well, you mentioned giving and taking. So what do you think about the efforts to have government workers pay for retirement and more?
Well, I guess if that was part of when you're sitting down negotiating, and we know everyone has to give and take a little, so the fact that they have agreed to, pay more into their health insurance and the pension, I think that's fine, that's okay. But the problem is, the other thing is about taking away their rights to fight their collective bargaining rights. And it's not just so much, it's about your right to work in a decent workplace and to be treated fairly and equally. And taking away that is really putting us back to serfdom, just slavery. And now this slavery is going to have a different hue. It's not only just going to be people of color, but it's really including a whole segment of our community, such as the middle class. And this is devastating, because the middle class is basically what holds the top and the bottom together. And once you move that cushion, it's going to be devastating.
So do you see this as an attack on classism?
Oh, yes, it definitely is. And but like I said, it's changing the color now, because basically, I think when a lot of people voted for Governor Walker, they didn't know that he was going to get them. In their mind, maybe it was just going to get those people who are not worthy and people on the bottom. But then they found out that it also impacted them, because the people in the middle their jobs depending on the people on the bottom, because they're the ones who provide services and things like that. And so when you cut out the services for the people on the bottom, you no longer need those people who deliver services.
So we're talking about a lot of realities here.
Oh yeah, and it's hitting home. People didn't realize that when they voted for Walker, they thought his being the governor was going to make their quality of life better by taking away some things from other groups, but they didn't realize how much their quality of life depended on the people on the bottom.
Let's just, one more question on this issue. Some people think the Democratic senators who refuse to show up to be outvoted are shirking their responsibility.
No, they're not. They're doing exactly what we elected them to do. And that's the thing that's so shocking, is that you didn't know that the senators had that kind of a backbone. And I'm just so proud and happy that they made the decision and they're sticking together. And they are definitely doing what we, the voters, elected them to do, and that is to take a stand. And part of your responsibility as an elected official is that you try to pass legislation that's beneficial, but then you also then try to stop legislation that's not good. So the senators going to Illinois is really, that's their way of stopping bad legislation. So they're doing the job. We're very pleased with what they're doing. And I say stay as long as is necessary, and we should do what we can to support them taking this stand, because the governor is definitely wrong on this issue.
What are your thoughts on the voter ID bill? We have about 30 seconds left.
I think that's just horrible too, and that is something as Democrats we've always fought against that, but of course now that the Democrats is not in power, the governor is just pushing that through, and that all has so many the rippling effect is very negative, and then it's $1 million more cost to the taxpayer to implement this. And yet we're going to be cutting out needed resources for people who really need things, but we're going to add $1 million to correct a problem that don't exist.
I'm almost afraid to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What have you been doing since you left office?
I've been getting up every day, going to the office. I have an office here, a space locally here, and I get up every day and I go in, and I'm doing some of the same things I was doing when I was in the legislature. It's just that I'm not going to Madison and I'm not receiving a paycheck at the end of the month.
Polly, we'd like to hear and see more of you back here on Black Nouveau. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for inviting me.
And that wraps up this edition of Black Nouveau.
Remember, in the coming week, do something to expand your world. Good night.
Good night, and thanks for watching.